Top 10 gemstones that skyrocketed for reasons no one expected. Not every gemstone rose because it was rare. Not every price spike came from a discovery. And not every trend started where you think it did. In the last 5 years, the gemstone world has shifted. But the reasons weren't geological. Some stones shone because of how they reacted to light. Others because someone saw their color and didn't forget. Curators revived some by collectors. Others disappeared the moment the world realized they had been misunderstood for decades. This isn't a list of the most expensive gems. It's not a ranking of the rarest minerals. It's a story of 10 stones whose value changed. Not because of what they are, but because of how we finally saw them. And in that shift, in that recognition, their price charts moved in ways no one predicted. These are the top 10 gemstones that skyrocketed for reasons no one expected. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Maw Sit Sit, when art reclaimed a misunderstood stone. The stones that spike in value usually follow a pattern: rarity, celebrity, supply. But not this one. This one rose because a misunderstanding finally ended. For years, Maw Sit Sit was the stone that dealers didn't know what to do with. It looked valuable. It wasn't. It came from the same geological corridor in Myanmar as the world's finest jadeite, but lacked clarity, consistency, and even a proper category. Most gem labs couldn't classify it cleanly. Most buyers passed it by without knowing why. Its name, Maw Sit Sit, comes from the village where it was first found in 1963, catalogued by Swiss gemologist Dr. Eduard Gubelin. Technically, it's not jade. It's a rock composed of cosmochlore, chromite, clinochlore, and trace jadeite, a mineral cocktail held together by high-pressure metamorphism. The greens are vibrant, often electric, but under magnification the patterns are chaotic, not the smooth translucence investors associate with Type A jadeite. For decades, that complexity was a problem. Commercially, Maw Sit Sit had no clear use. Jewelry setters found it brittle. Exporters couldn't brand it. Retailers didn't want to explain it. And collectors, trained to value precision, avoided it entirely. But quietly, the narrative changed. Not in auction houses, but in art studios. Around 2018, Chinese and Japanese micro-carving artists began experimenting with Maw Sit Sit. Unlike jadeite, which can fracture along internal stress lines, Maw Sit Sit revealed layered resistance under the blade. It held delicate relief patterns. It captured shadow depth. Most importantly, it had personality. No two cuts reacted the same. The pieces created weren't marketed as luxury. They were experimental objects, often posted anonymously online or displayed in private galleries. But collectors noticed. Not gem collectors, art collectors. And their interest wasn't in gemological purity. It was characterized by visual tension, texture, and a mineral narrative. As demand grew among sculptors, Burmese miners adjusted. While official exports of jadeite faced restrictions and international scrutiny, Maw Sit Sit, unregulated and largely ignored, flowed quietly into side channels. In Yangon, rough pieces that once sold for $20 per kilo began reaching $80, then $200, especially for blocks with tight grain and high chrome content. By 2022, Etsy and eBay sellers in the U.S. began reintroducing Maw Sit Sit to Western buyers, this time framed not as jade light, but as pre-ban Burmese greenstone or mixed chromium art mineral. Keywords shifted. So did pricing. A hand-carved pendant once listed at $40 was now clearing $300 in private sales. Primary gem dealers still avoid the stone, too risky for mainstream grading systems. But independent investors and stone carvers have quietly built a new class of value around it. The price surge wasn't driven by demand for jewelry, rarity of supply, or even media exposure. It happened because a niche group of creators found use where the market saw confusion. And when they acted on it, everything changed, and not with hype, but with precision. Ranked 9th, Petalite, the gemstone. No one valued, until lithium changed everything. The last stone climbed in value because artists redefined its use. But this one? It surged because the battery industry came knocking, and gem dealers followed. Petalite wasn't supposed to be here. Not in jewelry stores, not in gemstone auctions, and certainly not on lists of stones with investment potential. For most of its history, it sat in geological charts, not display cases. First described in Sweden in 1800, petalite was known for one thing: lithium content. It's a lithium aluminum silicate with a high melting point, no fluorescence, and no notable color zoning. In gem terms, it was deadweight. For over a century, it existed almost exclusively in the vocabulary of mining engineers, not jewelers. But in the last 5 years, everything changed, and the reason came from outside the gem world entirely. Between 2020 and 2024, global demand for lithium increased by more than 300%, driven almost entirely by the battery supply chain, especially for electric vehicles. While spodumene remained the dominant lithium source, petalite quietly gained favor among manufacturers due to its low impurity extraction profile. Unlike other lithium ores, petalite doesn't release as many volatile byproducts when processed. That gave it a strategic edge, not in the gem trade, but in geopolitics. In countries like Australia and Zimbabwe, where petalite occurs naturally alongside lepidolite and spodumene, state-backed mining contracts began shifting toward petalite-specific yields. Prices for raw petalite rose, not because jewelers were bidding, but because governments and corporations were. But a second market took notice. Collectors and gemstone investors, constantly scanning for undervalued minerals with rising strategic importance, began buying high-grade petalite samples not for cutting, but for long-hold storage. Transparent specimens with good clarity, once sold for $10 to $15 per carat as curiosities, now fetch over $100 on specialist platforms. These aren't being worn, they're being stored. Gem cutters also began experimenting. Though soft compared to quartz, petalite takes a surprisingly elegant polish. Its clarity, especially in light pink or gray, gives it a minimalist appeal, increasingly valued by boutique lapidary studios in Germany, Canada, and Japan. No marketing campaigns, no celebrity endorsements, just data, demand, and a widening supply chain gap. In 2023, petalite was quietly added to the U.S. Department of Energy's list of minerals critical to national security. A year later, gem brokers started receiving unsolicited offers for museum-grade pieces from buyers not interested in jewelry, but in future leverage. The value spike didn't come from myth, beauty, or rarity. It went from a reassignment of function, from gemstone to commodity to strategic asset. Ranked 8th, color change garnet. The gem that surged when emotion became currency. The previous stone surged because it was reclassified as critical. This one rose for a reason no analyst predicted. People started buying it not for its composition, but for how it made them feel. In the 1990s, gem dealers called it a novelty. Color change garnet had no pedigree, no royal history, and no mainstream demand. Its unusual optical effect, shifting from green or brown in daylight to red or purple under incandescent light, was considered too subtle to justify a premium. Alexandrite was the real prize. Color change garnet was the understudy. For years, it remained in the background. A collector's curiosity, a lab demo for pleochroism, occasionally a substitute in custom jewelry. But in 2022, the narrative changed, and not because of anything in geology. A single TikTok video showing a garnet ring switching color between sunlight and candlelight went viral with the caption, "This stone knows my mood better than I do." It wasn't scientific, it wasn't accurate, but it hit a nerve. Thousands of viewers reinterpreted color change garnet not as a gemological effect, but as an emotional one. Etsy shops started branding it as a mood stabilizer gem or relationship stone. On Reddit and Instagram, it was touted as the truth teller, the one gem that didn't hide its reaction to lighting, and by metaphor, emotion. None of these claims were geologically valid, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was that color change garnet offered something no mass-produced ring could: a visible shift, a moment of transformation, a private reaction to an uncontrolled world. As Gen Z and younger millennials turned away from traditional diamond-centered jewelry, they sought stones that responded to the environment, and by extension, to them. Color-change garnet became the ideal match, rare enough to feel personal, but not so expensive as to be unreachable. Supply, mainly from Tanzania and Madagascar, was never high. Dealers weren't stockpiled, so when demand surged, and it did, prices moved fast. Pieces that once sold for $70 a carat now move for over $400, especially if the change was substantial and the cut modern. But gemological suppliers weren't the ones profiting most. It was independent lapidaries, direct-to-consumer platforms, and lifestyle microbrands who branded the stone as part of identity, not inventory. This wasn't a price increase caused by shortage or discovery. It was caused by emotional alignment, by a cultural moment where transformation became a currency, and this overlooked garnet happened to embody it better than anything else on the shelf. Ranked 7th, Lapis Lazuli, the price of losing a 6,000-year supply chain. We've seen stones rise because of emotion, energy, or demand. But this one, its price surged because history itself became inaccessible. For over 6,000 years, lapis lazuli was not just a stone. It was a statement of power, belief, and beauty. Mined in the harsh peaks of Badakhshan, a remote region in northeastern Afghanistan, it was traded by caravans across Persia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Pharaohs were buried with it. Renaissance painters ground it into ultramarine pigment, so expensive it was reserved for the robes of saints and madonnas. For most of modern history, lapis from the Sarisang mine was obtainable with effort. Its quality was judged not by brilliance or refraction, but by depth, the intensity of its blue, the fine distribution of golden pyrite, and the absence of dull calcite veining. True Afghan lapis stood alone in the market, but in August 2021, that market fractured. With the Taliban's return to power, control over Badakhshan tightened. The Sarisang mine, previously accessible through local cooperatives and informal traders, became subject to restriction, taxation, and in many cases outright closure. Export routes were choked, official channels collapsed. What little lapis reached international dealers came with no reliable documentation. At the same time, global awareness of cultural preservation surged. In 2023, UNESCO declared Afghanistan's traditional lapis mining practices as intangible cultural heritage, recognizing not just the material, but the generational knowledge tied to its extraction and shaping. That recognition had unintended consequences. Collectors, museums, and even private investors began seeking pre-2021 lapis specimens, rough or carved, with credible provenance. Prices for medium-quality pieces doubled. High-grade cabochons with confirmed Afghan origin tripled, not because they were new, but because they were now considered unrepeatable. Meanwhile, competing sources, from Chile, Russia, or synthetic labs, failed to meet the aesthetic or cultural demand. The deep celestial blue of true Sarisang lapis couldn't be replicated, and buyers, once indifferent, became obsessed with origin. By late 2024, the trade had bifurcated. Afghan lapis, if provable, moved in an entirely different tier. Not gem, not mineral, artifact. The price surge wasn't fueled by discovery or promotion. A rupture drove it. The severing of a 6,000-year supply chain, and the realization that access to one of history's most enduring stones might not return in our lifetime. Ranked 6th, Chrysoprase, the gem that disappeared when everyone needed healing. Chrysoprase spent most of the last century unnoticed. It wasn't hidden, it wasn't lost. It was simply unrequested. Jewelers categorized it as apple green chalcedony. Mineralogists knew its green hue came from trace nickel, but in catalogs, showcases, and design briefs, chrysoprase was a footnote. Attractive, but unspectacular. There was no shortage, no geopolitical trigger, no museum exhibition, and yet in the span of just a few seasons, the gem vanished from the market. The trigger wasn't aesthetic, it was emotional. In the years following the global lockdowns, a shift began in how people related to physical objects. Jewelry sales didn't just recover, they reorganized. Buyers, especially in urban markets aged 25 to 50, stopped asking what a gem was worth. They started asking what it meant, what it held, what it carried back to them after everything. Chrysoprase, soft, glowing, and opaque, began showing up not in mainstream retailers but in trauma recovery spaces, meditation circles, and private gifting rituals. Counselors used it as a tactile anchor. Wellness brands offered it alongside journals and breathwork courses. The stone wasn't presented as a symbol of strength, but as an emblem of allowance, to rest, to grieve, to feel. This wasn't marketing. There was no campaign. Demand simply emerged and outpaced everyone. Within months, sourcing specialists began reporting shortages. The best material, mined from Western Australia, wasn't stockpiled. Few in the mainstream trade considered chrysoprase worth hoarding. Suddenly, miners were fielding requests from buyers they'd never worked with before. Boutique therapists, independent designers, and wellness collectives. By late 2023, wholesale prices had tripled. Not for precision-cut stones, but for raw, untreated slices that felt calming in the hand. Clarity, hue, symmetry, all the traditional criteria were replaced by weight, tone, and resonance. What startled the industry wasn't the price rise. It was who was buying and why. Gemological institutions weren't leading the shift. Consumers were, and they weren't looking for adornment. They were reaching for something real during a time when everything else felt provisional. By early 2024, multiple independent retailers reported being completely sold out. Resellers raised prices. Buyers accepted them. Chrysoprase wasn't being treated as a collectible or an investment. It was being treated as something rare in another way, emotionally legible. Its value didn't come from beauty or legacy or auction results. It came from timing, from being exactly the right texture, weight, and color when a generation decided to put language to grief through the objects in their hands. And by the time the gem industry looked up, it was already gone. Ranked fifth, blue amber, the stone that lit up for the right eyes. Amber has always been seen as a window into the past. Fossilized tree resin, trapping insects, pollen, or nothing at all. For centuries, collectors prized its warmth, its golden hues, and its connection to deep time. But blue amber was different. It came from the same fossilized material, but behaved like something else entirely. In normal indoor light, it looks ordinary. Sometimes honey brown, sometimes grayish yellow. Not striking, not rare. But under an intense white beam, or even better, ultraviolet, the surface erupts into visible blue. Not a flash, not a reflection, a glow. Deep, cold, otherworldly. This reaction isn't due to dye or treatment. It comes from molecular fluorescence, a rare interaction between light and the aromatic compounds still locked inside the resin. Only a few amber deposits on Earth show this effect strongly. The most famous are in the Dominican Republic, and unlike Baltic amber, these pieces don't always give up their secrets at first glance. For decades, blue amber was overlooked. Most gem guides didn't separate it from other amber. Jewelry catalogs treated it as an oddity, a color variation. Few sellers stocked it, and fewer still explained what it did. The phenomenon existed, but outside the frame. That changed when light conditions changed. As high-output LEDs, phone torches, and UV devices became commonplace, more people saw what blue amber could do and wanted it. Not for jewelry, not for investment, but for the experience of seeing it react. Demand came from visual artists, lighting designers, educators, and collectors who didn't care about carat weight. They wanted a response. Pieces that had been sitting unsold in mixed inventory trays were suddenly pulled out, tested, documented, and sold. The supply wasn't deep. Dominican mining of blue amber is limited, and fluorescence strength varies wildly from one pocket to the next. Not all blue amber glows, and among those that do, only a fraction show vivid saturation without needing heavy light correction. As more people discovered the effect, prices moved. Quietly at first, then sharply. A 20-gram rough specimen that sold for $40 in 2020 now clears over $400 if its glow is strong enough to be seen in daylight. Finished cabochons, once ornamental, are now classified by fluorescence grade, yet the trade remained unconventional. Central Gem shows rarely feature blue amber. Labs hesitate to grade it due to color instability and variable response. There's no GIA standard for glow per lumen, but that hasn't stopped buyers. In a market increasingly built around experience, not just possession, blue amber found a new function. It isn't worn to show status. It's used to show light. The price didn't spike because the material changed. It spiked because people's perception of it did. Ranked fourth, Hackmanite, the stone that changed then disappeared. On purpose. The last stone glowed under the right conditions. This one does something stranger. It changes color, then quietly erases itself. Hackmanite was never designed for the market. Too soft, too unstable, too strange. In gemological terms, it failed almost every test. No brilliance, low hardness, no lasting color. Under normal light, it appeared as a pale lilac or off-white stone with a dusty finish. In most jewelry stores, it was simply skipped. But that was only half the story. Hackmanite belongs to the sodalite group, a family of feldspathoids with unusually reactive crystal structures. What makes it unique is tenebrescence, the ability to darken under ultraviolet exposure, then slowly return to its original color in neutral light. It doesn't sparkle, it doesn't fluoresce, it forgets. The first time a buyer sees the change, the stone deepening from lavender to violet in seconds, then fading again over minutes. The reaction is consistent. Surprise. The second time, it's curiosity. The third, ownership. Hackmanite isn't collected for its appearance. It's collected for what it does. That distinction matters. For most of its history, the stone sat in university mineral sets in geology classrooms. It was labeled a demonstration mineral, rarely cut, never set. Gemological labs didn't track it. Marketplaces didn't list it. The material was too unpredictable to scale. Some pieces reacted dramatically, others barely at all. Even among known sources like Afghanistan, Greenland, and Canada, the inconsistency made it commercially irrelevant. That changed quietly. As more buyers began exploring experiential stones, not for adornment, but for interaction, Hackmanite became a candidate. Unlike fluorescent stones that merely glow, tenebrescence offers something different. A reversible change, observable without tools, repeatable without damage, and impermanent by design. Small groups of educators, collectors, and independent lapidaries began offering Hackmanite not as a gem, but as a behavioral mineral. Kits were assembled with UV torches. Packaging included time trials. Watch the fade. Compare with others. For the first time, the stone's inconsistency became an asset. People didn't want perfect Hackmanite. They wanted one that they could test and then retest. Stones became personal benchmarks. Mine fades in 4 minutes. Mine needs strong sunlight. The metrics were experiential, not optical. With this shift, prices moved. Between 2021 and 2024, high tenebrescent Hackmanite from northern Afghanistan and Greenland increased nearly tenfold in the collector circuit. Small cabochons that once sold for $10 to $15 moved above $100 if the color shift was potent and reversible. Raw chunks with instructional potential were traded between teachers at multiples of the original cost. Traditional gem houses didn't notice because they weren't looking. This wasn't a gem that needed a showcase. It needed a window and time. The value wasn't in the material. It was in the moment, in the viewer's decision to check again. Hackmanite didn't rise because it was rare. It grew because people stopped asking what a stone should be and started noticing what it could do, even if only for a few minutes at a time. Ranked third, Zultanite, the gemstone, that gained value one eye at a time. Some gems are rare, others are sacred. This one? It was doubted for years until people saw it change color with their own eyes. For decades, diaspora was an underwhelming mineral. Discovered in the 1800s, named for its tendency to disperse under heat, it sat in museum drawers and mineralogical indexes. Chemically simple, geologically stable, visually inconsistent. Then in the early 2000s, something changed. Transparent, color-shifting diaspore started appearing from the Anatolian mountains of Turkey. The stones were cut, polished, and marketed under a new name, Zultanite. It sounded regal. Controlled mining ensured authenticity. A luxury brand was built, but the market didn't follow. Traditional gem buyers were skeptical. The stone lacked a historical footprint. It wasn't royal. It wasn't ancient. It didn't even have consistent color grading. Just a fancy diaspore, some said. A marketing exercise. And yet, Zultanite stayed. It didn't disappear. It didn't surge. It hovered. Not rare enough for auctions, not well known enough for collectors, until people stopped reading about it and started seeing it. In a brightly lit shop, the gem looked olive. At home, under warm bulbs, it turned pink. Outside in the shade, a flash of champagne yellow. No filters, no treatment, no instructions, just light. And it kept happening. Designers began using Zultanite not as a central statement, but as a conversation piece. Small rings, soft pendants. No need to explain anything. The stone did it on its own. Buyers didn't ask for lab reports. They asked, "Does this change?" Then they watched. Then they believed. By 2023, the shift was measurable. Sales increased, but more notably, returns decreased. In a trade notorious for buyers' regret, Zultanite earned loyalty not through legend, but through physics. The pricing followed. Diaspora that once sat unsold at $60 per carat was now cleared at $250, even higher if the color shift was vivid and responsive. Not because a celebrity wore it, not because a museum endorsed it, but because people bought what they could test. In-store, at home, without permission. Gem dealers observed a new trend. First-time buyers entering with no brand loyalty, no budget logic, and a single straightforward requirement. I want to see it change in front of me. Zultanite didn't rise through heritage. It grew because it proved itself in the moment it was handled, a rare reversal of trust, from document to demonstration. It didn't matter if the stone had a long legacy. It mattered that the light was real. Ranked second, Grandidierite, the stone. Too rare to be commercialized, but bought anyway. Grandidierite was never supposed to be in rings. Discovered in 1902 near the southern coast of Madagascar, it was classified, documented, and shelved. Museums received samples. Mineralogists admired its pleochroism, that rare property where one stone shows multiple colors depending on the angle. But nothing happened after that. No market emerged, no collections formed, no trade followed. For 100 years, Grandidierite remained a scientific footnote. Then in 2014, a discovery changed the profile slightly. A pocket of translucent material was found in southern Madagascar. Not flawless, but cuttable. A few specimens reached private dealers. Some were faceted, some mounted, but the supply never stabilized. No large parcel appeared, no jewelry line launched. And that's when something unusual happened. Instead of being dismissed as commercially useless, Grandidierite was adopted, not by luxury brands, but by curators. Not sold in stores, but shown in vitrines. A gem too rare to grade became too singular to price. By 2021, galleries in Tokyo and Geneva began exhibiting high-transparency Grandidierite as mineral sculpture. One-off pieces, documented by origin, size, and spectroscopic profile. They weren't measured against sapphire or tourmaline. They were evaluated like jade plaques or meteorites, unique, untethered to market benchmarks. Buyers responded, not collectors of jewelry but of rarity, not designers but institutions. Prices doubled, then tripled. Not based on carat weight, but on provenance, cutting orientation, and crystal integrity. A 5-carat stone with solid color zoning and clean orientation could command over $100,000. Not because it was wearable, but because it was irreplaceable. What drove the price wasn't publicity, it was privacy. Grandidierite began appearing in sealed collections, geological archives, and museum-backed investment portfolios. Dealers didn't stock it, appraisers didn't have comparables. Most jewelers still hadn't heard of it. But in closed networks, among high-level gemologists, art investors, and institutional buyers, it became a signal, not of wealth, but of access. The rise of Grandidierite came not from mass adoption, but from selective recognition. The market didn't shift upward, it shifted inward. The stone wasn't bought to be sold again. It was purchased so no one else could have it. In first place, Sugilite, the stone. Everyone overlooked until it was too late. For decades, Sugilite sat in display cases no one took seriously. Opaque, inconsistent, soft. The wrong kind of purple. Not vibrant like amethyst, not translucent like spinel, not structured like charlotte. It was sold in slabs to metaphysical shops, cut into beads for handmade necklaces, and listed in trade shows under miscellaneous. For gemologists, it was a mineral. For jewelers, it was a liability. For collectors, it was forgettable. And yet, in 2025, it became inevitable. The shift didn't begin with discovery or rarity. It started with a moment, one that happened outside the gem world entirely. At the Met Gala, Rihanna walked onto the carpet wearing a 19.3-carat Sugilite ring. The stone wasn't flashy, it wasn't cut for brilliance, it wasn't even named in the official style notes. But the camera lingered. The lighting caught it. And for millions watching, it didn't matter what the stone was called. It mattered that it didn't look like anything else on that carpet. In less than 72 hours, every high-quality Sugilite specimen on the open market had been purchased. But this wasn't a celebrity effect. It was a recognition delay, snapping back into place. Sugilite had long been the wrong stone at the wrong time, and it was first discovered in Japan, then sourced in commercial quantities in South Africa. But just as the diamond era was peaking, too soft for the luxury houses, too new for tradition, too opaque for high jewelry, it became popular in spiritual circles in the 1980s, and that alone kept it from serious valuation for nearly 40 years. Until now, when the market no longer asked if a stone could fit a pedigree, but whether it carried a presence. Sugilite didn't climb because it was rebranded. It climbed because the people who once ignored it had been replaced by a generation who judged by saturation, structure, and silhouette, not history. What followed was not a price spike, it was a vacuum. Within weeks, Sugilite listings with deep violet grades disappeared from dealers in Hong Kong, New York, and Bangkok. Private sales crossed six figures. Art jewelry houses began releasing one-off pieces, not as accessories, but as studio minerals. Sellers who once had Sugilite on back shelves were suddenly fielding calls from curators. Demand was not speculative, it was corrective. Sugilite wasn't trending, it was overdue. The gemstone didn't become rare overnight, it became understood. None of these gemstones changed in structure. Their chemical formulas stayed the same. Their sources didn't expand. Their clarity didn't improve. And yet their value moved sharply and sometimes instantly. Because in a market built on permanence, it was perception that shifted first. What we believed about rarity, what we thought defined worth, what we overlooked for years, all of it turned, sometimes in silence, sometimes in seconds. For some stones, the world simply caught up. For others, it finally paused long enough to notice. And in that brief window between familiarity and rediscovery, prices didn't just increase, they recalibrated. Not every gemstone holds its value, but everyone on this list held a moment where value wasn't assigned. It was recognized. Let us know which one resonates with you in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.